Hi everyone, this is Elena of The Witch's Box, and we're here today with another episode of The Witch's Booktube. But as you saw by the title, this is not a usual booktube video for us, for me, from me. And it's a title, it's a book, it's an author, it's a topic that I've been kind of skirting around for several months. I've probably started mentioning this a very long time ago, not mentioning the name, not mentioning the title, but hinting at different aspects of this issue that we're going to talk about today. Up until just right this very second, have been debating on whether to talk about it or not for a million reasons, partly because it's not necessarily the intention of this channel to deviate too far from let's review books that I think you should read. But I think that this topic comes up enough, and because of this particular book and the effect that this book and this writer has had in a positive way on hundreds of thousands of possibly millions of women specifically in the world, and because so many of us have this book title as one of the most seminal books in our lives that helped develop us as women, as witches, as feminists, it's a very difficult topic to not talk about because it brings up all these very huge issues around like cancel culture and separating art from the artist, and there's a lot going on here. So that is why this video is actually happening. It's why I felt like it just needs to happen. We need to just do it. So we're talking about this because there are a lot of people out there who are holding deep, deep, painful conflict over the effects this book has caused in their lives and then learning the truth about this particular author. I want to say to you now, before I go any further, we're going to cover some pretty heavy topics here. I'm not going to go into too much detail around the heavy topics, but it's heavy. It's uncomfortable. And for some of you, if you are in the midst of a really destabilized phase of PTSD or depression or anxiety, this might not be the video for you to watch. So I support you in being responsible for yourself and doing whatever it is that you need to do to take care of your needs. Again, if you're in a destabilized place, you can watch this some other time. It's not that big a deal, okay? So the book we're talking about is The Mists of Avalon. I believe there are 7 books in that series. They all had impact, but The Mists of Avalon is the one that people most likely of my generation will say it changed my life. And the author is Marion Zimmer Bradley. And at the time when I first read that book, I think that book had been out for a few years already. I don't remember exactly what year I read it. It is based on the Arthurian legend, but from Morgana's perspective. It flipped the switch on reality. It flipped the switch because, and I'm going to give you an example of how that switch was flipped for me and for many people. But it flipped the switch because the Arthurian legend has been written and rewritten and dissected forever. We have so many versions of that story, and it is a set of archetypes that have influenced all of Western culture in one way or another. There's no way to extricate this legend from Western culture. And I don't know enough about other cultures to say that it's also influenced other cultures, but Western culture influences so many other cultures for good and for bad, that I would say that this particular legend and story has influenced probably in some way or another the whole world, even if we're not aware of it. If you don't know what the Arthurian legend is, Wikipedia it, check it out, do the thing. There are some huge players in this story, some big characters in this story, and every single time in history that story has been told, it has always been told by the perspective of Arthur and the perspective of Min. And Morgana, who plays a massive role in this story, has always been played from that lens and from that gaze. So all we know is that she was horrible. But here comes this book, The Mists of Avalon, that completely flips the lens and looks at it from the story of the pagans, from the story of Morgana, and you get a completely different, I just got chills. You get such a completely different perspective, not just on that story, but in my mind, in the mind of many women who I have spoken to who have read this book and say, fucking blew the doors off the hinges for me in so many ways. What happened was I realized, holy shit, all of my holy stories were told from a lens that has zero to do with me. It has zero to do with who I am as a woman. It has zero to do with the completely deep and meaningful and traumatic story of the woman who played that role in that story. And I'm going to make a leap. This is my personal stuff to say that it's the same for all women in the world who have been subjected to the religion of man, with God as a man as the head of all divinity. Okay? All of those things are tied. Don't think that they're not. The stories that we tell over and over and over again in our cultures shape culture profoundly. It teaches us about our roles. It teaches us about our value. And so to have this beautiful, powerful Arthurian legend, always told by this perspective, has done a number on women. And so when along comes this story from the perspective of Morgana, the implications of how that story was told are so far reaching that there are still generations of women today. I don't know all the labels of the generations, like the Zennials, the Millennials, the blah, 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 the Zers. I don't even know who they are. But it's still having an effect on people because they don't quite know what's going on with the author. And they don't know that it's probably better to just not read this book because this author has huge issues in her past. So I say all that not because I am pro Marion Zimmer Bradley. I say that to give you context for why this book is such a powerful book, why this book was so seminal in the lives of so many people, and why still today it still continues to do that. After you watch this video, you decide, hell no, I am not reading anything this woman ever wrote because huge problematic issues with this author. I want to give you an example of the effect that this book created. This is not as powerful of an effect, but it'll give you a little bit of an experience of what I'm talking about. I'm going to read this from my phone. This is a meme that's been going around. I reposted it on my Facebook. If you follow me on Facebook, it's probably come up for you. But this is an example of the lens switch. Okay? It's not going to be as powerful as the book, but it'll give you an idea of what I'm talking about and why it changed the script for so many of us. Again, it's a meme. I don't even know who, what, when. Someone named Maud Mostly on, I believe maybe this is Twitter, posted this, and it's been reposted everywhere, all the places, okay? And this is what it says. We were really told that she slept her way to the top instead of men in power abusing their power by withholding promotions and threatening demotions if they did not receive sex from their workers. That we have been blaming women and shaming women as whores and sluts and all sorts of horrible things because they slept their way to the top, not because they had talent, not because they had to fight a system that is stacked against them, but she's a whore or she's a slut and she slept her way to the top. And never once do we talk about the fact that there are men at the top who are using women's bodies because they have the power to do that and get what they want while lording over them money and promotion and advancement. We never look at it from that perspective. But when you start to think about it, the ramifications of that switch in perspective is wide-reaching. And it gets you to start looking at everything around you with a very different eye. This book did that. And not only did this book do that, but it shook the ground of these archetypes psychologically, these archetypes that we've all held to be models for chivalry and loyalty and fighting for the good. It shook those rigid, deeply rooted cultural archetypes that we've all held and taken for granted, and that has permeated all of our cultures, religious cultures, and society, just all of it. So this is why this book has had so much impact. I'm going to say this really quickly too, that I haven't read this book again in a very long time. I was going to read them all again. After doing more research into all of the allegations and the issues, I don't know that I can, and I'm really sad about that. I'll be very honest with you, because I wanted to know, does this book hold the test of time? I am a much more liberated woman now. I am a much more radical feminist than I've ever been. I'm afraid that if I were to go back without the issues with Marion Zimmer Bradley, if I were to go back and read the book, that it would seem very elementary and disappointing. And so for a long time, I'm like, I don't want to go back because I don't want to ruin the mystique and the revolution and how pivotal this was for me. So that is the effect. I know that there are people who are watching this, who have been following this channel, who have said to me that yes, these books were some. I have never met any woman, I swear to you, I have never met any woman who read that book who didn't say it was revolutionary. I think that Marion Zimmer Bradley died, don't quote me, I read this and then there's a lot of it that I just didn't want to keep in my brain and my body because it's just, the allegations are horrific. The damage is still there. I believe she died maybe in 2009. And it wasn't until 2014 that her daughter came out and pretty much revealed the allegations of sexual abuse to her, her brother, and myriad other young children, basically. This is where we're at. This person, this author, was a sexual abuser and a sexual predator, and so was her husband. Since then, the authors who have co-written books with Marion Zimmer Bradley have vowed and committed to donating all royalties from all the books that they ever made with Marion Zimmer Bradley to charities and to organizations that work with rape victims and child abuse victims and all sorts of really great organizations as a stand. Okay, so this is a far-reaching situation. It's not like it's this person had unpopular political beliefs. She was a monster. And many of us were left with this shocking news, like, how do you reconcile the fact that this monster, that's my opinion, but this monster wrote something that could have such a positive effect on so many people, because the positive effect still stands. And this is one of the reasons why I wanted to talk about this, because I know a lot of people who are in deep turmoil over this. Like, what does it mean? Does it mean that my liberation and my awakening was a lie? I'm here to tell you that no, it wasn't. If this book, no matter who wrote it, had this type of positive, far reaching impact on you, that impact was real. Of course it was real. But we're different now. We're older now. Time has passed now. And now we know things that we didn't know then, and we have choices to make. And I'm not here to tell you what choices you need to make, because honestly, I have for a very long time been of the mind that it's okay to separate the art from the artist, because art is a whole other animal. Sometimes art, oftentimes, is like we are transmuting something from on high that has nothing to do with us, and we're a vessel. And we've seen this throughout history where artists put out phenomenal work, even though they're leches. Like, I think this is one of my contradictory things. I still, to this day, for very personal reasons and for very real reasons, feel like Pablo Picasso is one of my creative heroes. The man was a lech, right? The art and the artist, it's like, how do you work with this? The art has inspired so much in me and taught me so much for different reasons. How do you separate that? It's a hard call. But for me, in doing this research and also trying to just sit with where I feel, I know that the bigger conflict was, what does this mean about me? That this person created this book and it was so positive for me, while this person was such a horrible human being and left wreckage. Like, they left an intense and gorgeous legacy for the positive, but also a horrendous legacy that has still affected people to this day. It's a hard place to be. It's an uncomfortable place to be. There are some people out there who have done their research and feel like, yes, you can separate the art from the artist because the money now for these books don't go directly to the author. It is unclear, by the way, where this money goes, because Marion Zimmer Bradley left a trust to manage her literary works and a couple of anthologies that kept going long after she passed. It's unclear where this money is going and if it's benefiting those who are victims now. So there's some unclarity there. I am not comfortable anymore promoting these books for you to buy. I can't give you an example of other books that do what she did in this book, and I still feel like it was an important turning point in feminist fiction. I feel like it was a missing piece to the Arthurian legend that we all desperately needed, but the story's horrendous. And I'm not going to give you the details to all of it, other than to say a couple of specific things about the daughter. There's a lot of controversy now about the daughter who spoke out in 2014. She's made several statements, and she's also written a book about the abuse. So there's that. And one of the original statements that she made was she felt a deep sense of fear and shame and trepidation about revealing the truth about her mother, because she was afraid that everyone who was so positively touched by her books would be devastated, would come after her, wouldn't believe her, like all the things. I believe her. But she did. And it rocked the world. This is still, we're in 2021. This is still a hot conversation that's going on. I want to say this because since then, she has made quite a few statements about the abuse and where she's at. I want to try to say this as sensitively as possible, because there's a lot of backlash towards her because of the dynamic of the abuse. I'm not going to get into the details, but the dynamic of the abuse was such, and the brainwashing in that system, that family abusive system, was such where homosexuality was very deeply conflated with pedophilia. Okay, this is really difficult to talk about. Again, if you don't feel comfortable, go. Just go. You don't have to listen to me. And she's still in that mindset. And some people are like, she's a homophobe, she's hateful. And I don't see that at all. Yes, it is totally ridiculous and wrong and misguided to conflate homosexuality with pedophilia. But this is a person who's still very deeply in her wounds and very deeply in her post-traumatic stress. I don't know how long she's been in therapy, if she's been in therapy at all. And coming from a semi-professional place as a past social worker, as a minor in psychology, like, I am not a professional licensed by any means, but I have a knowing that what's happening with her right now is really just a product of her. She's still deeply in her wounding. She went through a horrific childhood. So the backlash against her for these views, I think, are misguided, even though what she's saying is hurtful. I would like for us to be more psychologically and emotionally mature in being able to see this is deep wounding at work. She's still in her deep wounding around this. And so for me, it is not a reason to discount her accounts of abuse and call them lies just because you don't like the way she's exhibiting her post-traumatic stress disorder. Do you know what I mean? It's a messy, 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 ugly, ugly thing in every direction. There is some mourning. For me, there's some mourning for a lot of people because there is a world in which I don't know that I can ever read these books again because you can't unknow what you know. And while doing all this reading, I'm feeling like, oh, I know way too much. Not that that's ever an issue. That should never be an issue, but I know too much to not have that flavor, that deep dysfunction lace every word that I read when I read these books. And there's mourning around that. Look, I'm not here to tell you what to do, even though I do that a lot. I think information is power. I think that there are probably other ways in the world to gain this type of awakening that isn't this particular book. I would love to see more women write the Arthurian legend from this type of lens. I'm sure that there are those out there who are that I don't know about, so that if you know people who are doing this, please let me know down below, because I think that it's an important story to keep fleshing out for us in terms of the development of our Western culture. Also, this is my personal opinion, but I feel a pretty deep sense of authority in saying this to all of my sisters out there who read this book and feel like it was such a pivotal book in their lives. I feel a confidence in my bones to say that it was real. It was real because you're here now and you're different from what you were 20, 30, 24, 10, whatever years ago since you read that book. That change in you, that awakening you is real. And the author was a monster, and we probably shouldn't be buying these books anymore. And all of those things can exist at once as a truth. It's gross, it's uncomfortable, it's a disappointing thing. I don't know if it's Moira or Maras. I don't know how to pronounce her name. This is the daughter's name. Reading her accounts, I didn't read the book. I've read her articles and interviews in different publications. I will not be reading her book. Gave me a really deep sense of just how deeply wounded she is. And it's really heartbreaking. And the stories of others, I mean, it's really heart-wrenching in a really horrific way. There's no way to get past that. Sometimes I think, yes, separate the art from the artist, but sometimes you can't. And I think that we need to be comfortable with living in those gray areas. At the time that I'm recording this, last night we had our live Witches Book Coven gathering. And it was just the group. We had a lot of topics to cover, I think, as a group, a closed group. One of the things that came up was the idea or the issue of problematic or potentially problematic authors when we talk about books, when we buy books. And I have a stand that's incredibly subjective. There are going to be times that I choose books for the book subscription where authors have said things that are controversial or unpopular, and I'm okay with that. And there are some exceptions. I'm really, as a person, as a spiritual person, as a witch, as now probably an elder in my community and in the community of this business, I am tasked with the responsibility of holding space and making choices about where we are going to go as a community, specifically to those who get on my train. Do you know what I'm saying? And I have a really huge issue with this cancel culture that's going on. There is no room for mistake. There is no room for humanity. There is no room for practicing love and compassion and patience for people who don't agree with us. That is a problem. It is a deep spiritual issue that we need to look at. I am not saying by any stretch of the imagination that something or someone like Marion Zimmer Bradley, who has caused irreparable harm to other humans, needs to be forgiven. I am not the person to say that, and I'm not the person to even issue an opinion on that. But I do know that there are some issues for me that are black and white as a community leader, and some issues that are very gray. For me, an issue of having someone in our community or supporting someone in the world who is a child abuser, that is an out. That is a non-negotiable. That is never going to happen here. But if someone has an opinion that is politically opposed to mine, that I may think is lame and uninformed and just like, whoa, did you like drink the Kool-Aid? Like, you know, when I think so judgy about a different opinion, that to me isn't reason enough to cancel a person's career, to malign their character, and to ask them out. Where are we learning to practice compassion and love and community? And where are we learning and practicing how to come together for our mutually shared desire for spiritual deepening and allowing for the differences? Like, this is a problem, and it's getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And a lot of you are really indulging the habit and addiction to reactionism that is going to steer us all in the wrong way. Those are strong words, but there it is. So I'm saying that because this artist conversation keeps coming up more and more and more, and I am tasked with the responsibility of making specific decisions because I promote people to my people, right? For reading and for education and for learning. And there are going to be places in which I'm going to say they have an unpopular, controversial opinion, but we're going to support this person anyway because there's something to be learned here. And then there are going to be situations where this person is a monster and it creates a level of unsafety for the world, for our community, and that is a no. That is also a reason why I felt like I just needed to do this video and stop putting it off, because it's kind of been weighing on me that I said that I would talk about this, but I haven't talked about this. I said that I would, and I haven't. And here it is. And so I recognize that I'm the one who makes those decisions for the group. I think that my personal line when it comes to things like the art and the artist has to do with deeper safety. So that makes those decisions easier for me. But I'm also on a personal quest to not write off people who don't agree with me. Because what the hell are we doing? Those are different things, but we treat them the same. And it is dangerous. I said this last night in our live that my parents were refugees who fled a country that was taken over by a dictator who were slaughtering people for not having the right opinion. So I come to the table with a lot of a live wire around this. I love this country. I'm in the United States, even though this country is jacked up beyond recognition. And I love our Constitution. And I support you as much as I support me in having the right to believe what I believe, even if I don't like it. So I have kind of veered off the original topic, but I think that they're similar in the sense that, one, a lot of this is subjective. Two, you need to make choices for yourself about what you will support and what you won't. Three, in the context of the Witch's Box, I'm the deciding factor. And the way I make decisions about this is it about a difference of opinion or is it about unsafety, right? Those things are very clear for me, and it's easy for me to say no to this thing that is deeply harmful, and yes to the thing that may make you feel uncomfortable, but in the end, if you work through it, you're going to probably grow. So I know that I have veered a little bit off the beaten path with this, but this conversation about the art and the artist is going to continue to come up. Someone said very intelligently last night that if we were to basically burn every piece of art or book that's ever been written by someone who was problematic from the beginning of time, we wouldn't have anything to read. We need to learn to take humanity as what it is. We continue to grow, we continue to evolve. We are having conversations today that we would have never had 20 years ago. We have evolved as a people. And let me tell you, every single one of us would be shut down and canceled for bullshit that we said 5, 10, 15, 20, 30 years ago because we didn't know better. So I want to say that please keep that in mind. When it's a difference of opinion, canceling is not the option. Canceling is not the spiritually mature thing to do. Reacting in indignation as if you've never said anything wrong in your life is ridiculous. And it's spiritually immature. Stop it. And when it's an author or a creator that has caused such deep, irreparable harm on the world, because none of the people that this person abused will ever be the same again, in a very negative, very wounded way. That's not to say that people can't heal, but their lives have been altered for the negative, and this person was responsible for that. We need to make decisions about that. I can't give my money to that organization that now is the trust fund for her books. I will also not bash her daughter for being where she's at in her wounding. I still believe her. I still support her. So don't conflate those things, because those things are getting conflated in a way that I think is incredibly harmful for those people who are just not where you're at. There you go. It wasn't a book review. It was a vlogish kind of thing. I take and I'm grateful for the growth and the awakening that that book had in my life. I still love the story. I can't go back to read it, and I can't support the author. So I can hold all those things. And it's not easy. It's not a comfortable place to hold those things that feel like they're at war with each other, but they're all true. They're all true. I know that many of you have read this book and read a bunch of other books by Marion Zimmer Bradley. Marion Zimmer Bradley also, at the time when she was writing, she was incredibly prolific, and she's probably one of the most prolific sci-fi fantasy women writers that still to this day we've ever had. A lot of the other books that she wrote that were in sci-fi genre were not as obviously as popular as this one book, but she contributed a lot to that. It's an uncomfortable truth. So I don't really give you any answers other than to make sure to drive this home again, that your growth is yours. Your growth and awakening from that book was not a lie. And if you have thoughts about that, I'd love to hear about it down below. I'm working with myself very diligently at not writing people off for not agreeing with me, because I fall into that category as well, and making discerning choices between how do we keep growing as a Witch's Box community by allowing to be uncomfortable with the fact that someone else has a different opinion, but still respecting them as a person and learning what we can from the situation. So I'm on that edge of keeping that container and continuing to nourish it while also making choices about there are some people that I just cannot support. I can't get behind. It's deeply disappointing and deeply painful, but it's just a reality. And those things need to be very different in order to move forward in a way that is emotionally healing and bridging those gaps that we just keep making bigger and bigger and bigger in society today. I would invite all of you to send or light a candle and send some healing, supportive, safe love to those who are able to accept it, who have been victimized in this way. It's a horrible road to walk, especially when you've had to walk it in silence for a very long time. So my heart goes out to her. And I would suggest to those of you who are bashing her because she's got, at this point, what we would consider very problematic beliefs, I would suggest that you look at it from a different lens. That wounding and the gaslighting and brainwashing that goes on with that kind of abuse can run for a very long time in a person. Yeah, love. Just send love.